People who knew murders before they killed someone. What are some red flags you didn't notice at the time? A guy my sister dated was stalking her when they broke up. I was 15, home alone with glandular fever, and he smashed the front window of our house and broke in. He came into my room and was absolutely off his face, asking where she was. I said I didn't know. He shut my door and proceeded to trash our house. Cops came. No charges or court date. I still to this day can't believe he got away with it. I am from a small town in VT. 2 boys slit their foster mom's throat for not giving them her car in about 2000 or so. Weird. ETA, Northeastern VT. Surprisingly, the foster mom did survive, though barely. She didn't foster anymore, and was in bad shape for a while. They caught the boys in NH in her car. I don't remember all of the details. It was attempted murder, as she somehow miraculously survived. A guy I knew growing up. I used to sleep over at their house as his sister was a friend. He was always off, very aggressive and violent when picking on his sister. I remember his mom got short with me once when I asked about an injury she had. My friend later told me her brother had stabbed their mom with a pencil during an argument. Many years later, he gets frustrated with his mom while they're in a car and attacks her, stabbed her in the face repeatedly with a knife he had on him, and put her in critical condition. He was smiling in his mugshot. Dude was very possessive of his girlfriend and kind of a dick. He ended up strangling her, tossing her body in the trunk of her car, driving to a busy grocery store and parking it. Then he skipped town. Ended up getting caught in a motel a few counties over because he missed work and the cops got his location off his phone GPS. He actually just got sentenced to life in prison last year. So I worked with a guy, and one day he seemed upset. He got married young and he feared his wife, who separated from him, was starting to date his ex-best friend. I said, "That's tough, sorry to hear it, you're young." Next. He immediately got his intense look and said he'd kill them. I told him you don't want to say that, and blew it off. It seemed like blowing off steam kind of comment, but I was surprised at the intensity. Normally an extremely laid-back guy. However, I felt it strange enough that I wanted to walk away. 6 months later he went to his old apartment at 6 a.m., and the two were in bed. He entered their bedroom, put them on their knees and shot each in the head. He then put the gun to his head and ended it. The girl flinched at the shot, and survived a headshot. The new boyfriend died. I always think about that one interaction. It's a weird thing to say, but getting shot in the head has an oddly high survival rate. The skull is pretty strong and very rounded. Any kind of angle from aim to flinching drastically increases the chance of the bullet grazing along the skull rather than through. It's the same reason tanks have angled sides, to encourage the things hitting it to follow the path of least resistance. Answering for my dad, it wasn't specifically a red flag, but the guy was off. He swore up and down he was an all-star level NBA player's uncle and was just odd in general. He ended up being caught kidnapping/raping/killing a prostitute. And the DNA was also matched with DNA from another prostitute who'd had the same fate like 10 years prior. Had a substitute teacher in middle school who committed suicide on his wife when she was diagnosed with cancer. Looking back, he seemed massively depressed every time I saw him, but was otherwise very kind, totally out of left field. My cousin's husband, when they first got married, he was a decent guy, though I had only met him after they got married. I thought it was weird that she had a kid that wasn't living with them, but I was young and brushed it off. Over a decade later, I find out he was abusive and she was divorcing him. He shot her outside her workplace. It was on THR News. Thankfully he was caught not long after. I worked with Edward Paul Morris right up until the point he murdered his pregnant wife and their children. Can't say it was so much missed signs as much as signs that are even more disturbing in hindsight. On the surface he seemed like a polite, friendly guy if a little awkward. He would make small talk with me in the office break room, almost always complaining about his wife and stress at home. He treated it like chit-chat, but it was clear he couldn't stop thinking about it. When a mutual coworker and I moved into a rental house together, he offered to come mow the lawn. He did some yard maintenance work on the side. We didn't have curtains up yet and I was in my new bedroom putting clothes away when I realized he was outside, lawnmower running, but just standing there and staring at me through the window. Creeped me right the fuck out. My ex-girlfriend's stepfather would not let her mother leave the house with their youngest child. I witnessed a couple of dramatic conflicts with yelling and blocking of the driveway. Turns out she wanted a divorce and was cheating on him with a convicted pedophile. I was a fairly sheltered teen at the time and pretty much tried to ignore what I didn't understand. He stabbed her to death in their kitchen. Even though it was clear something was not right, I still could not have imagined that outcome. I've spent time with many men in my years of bartending that match this guy's description. I'm overall not that cautious, outside of common sense and general burnout from people. I don't care if you're my own mother, I'm locking you out while I close and I'll meet you when I'm done. But this story really made me wonder how much I really know anyone. When my mom was in high school, there was a guy that was infatuated with her and became very pissed off when she would reject him. She was a waitress and he came in and sat in her section. He left her half a penny as a tip. The dude went through the effort of cutting a penny in half just for that moment. He later went on to murder a girlfriend of his. So I went to a big university that had a weird close-knit feel. There was this girl that I knew but I wasn't friends with. She was nice but very over-the-top bubbly, enthusiastic about everything and super extroverted. She was just a little much for me. Good in very, very small doses. She started dating this guy who was the opposite of her, shy, quiet. Followed her around like a little puppy. I can't remember now if it was over a holiday break, like Thanksgiving or Christmas, or if it was just a weekend, but we all found out that his parents, younger brother and dog were all killed in a house fire. Everyone felt so bad for him. Her family took him in. Support poured out from everywhere. Then we find out he killed all of them and then set the house on fire to cover it up. Shocked everyone. Back in the mid-90s I used to live with a friend in Hamilton, Ontario. We had upstairs neighbors that used to play loud music like all the time. One time I got so annoyed that I grabbed a broom and started jabbing the ceiling and they stopped. A few months pass and one day the apartment is just filled with police. It turns out that the neighbors were gangsters and murdered someone in a home break-in and on the run from police. I never broomed another neighbor ever again. Not quite murder, but the guy in the apartment next to mine snapped and stabbed 2 builders and a dog, and went on the run. Everyone ended up being fine, though. The red flags started appearing one by one the longer I knew him. He ended up stalking me after I finally told him to leave me alone, which is a whole other story. But after the stabbing, I was making chit-chat in the hall with the policeman who was put in charge of the stalking case. They were going through his apartment for evidence for both cases, and he just casually let me know that in the guy's bathtub, there were half a dozen dead rat carcasses that had had their brains bashed in with a hammer. My neighbor had always joked about if I ever saw a rat, he'd take care of it for me. So yeah, suffice to say, I got the fuck out of town until they caught him. When I was a teenager hanging out in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, a drunk older kid walked up to me and ripped my glasses off my face and tried to hockey fight me, completely out of the blue. I headbutted him in the nose and bravely ran away, Sir Robin style. I heard that a couple of years later he stabbed someone to death in a similar incident. I guess his interaction with me helped him hone his craft. Brave Sir, our stupid earth ran away, bravely ran away. When danger reared its ugly head, he bravely turned his tail and fled. Yes, brave Sir, our stupid earth turned about and gallantly he chickened out. Bravely taking to his feet he beat a very brave retreat, bravest of the brave, Sir, our stupid earth. I was an elementary counselor in a small town for 2 years. I knew these 2 boys, good friends, when they were 3rd and 4th graders. A few years ago, when they were both 16, one murdered the other. buried him on his property, and was quickly discovered after the boy was reported missing. It wrecked this town. I only knew the boys as 10-year-olds, but am still completely shocked years later. My childhood friend killed his parents. His dad was my dad's best friend. Red flags: drinking at an extremely young age, like 9. Pornography also at that age. He never had a sense of right, wrong. Cruelty to animals. Sexually assaulted other kids in the neighborhood. It reads like a profile of a future murderer. Heavy drug use did the rest of the work, and he killed both of them for oxy. Since he was my friend, I guess I missed it all at the time. But my parents got me the fuck away from him with a quickness once I mentioned some things to them. He didn't murder her, but he sure tried. Stabbed 24 times. He was unable to sleep. He was constantly talked about his medication and anxiety and his inability to sleep. He was trying to get a medical leave when his wife left him. He snapped a few weeks later. We didn't really miss the red flags. We just didn't expect him to do it since he had never laid a hand on her. Edit. Apparently he stabbed her 31 times. He was sentenced to 18 years. My sister's fiancé murdered her. Red flags: well, not really, except he was suddenly into many things that my sister was into, like 1,000,000% became his persona. He wasn't his own person, as was super clingy and needy. Found out a few weeks before he killed her he was suddenly into guns. She wasn't. Tried to leave. Murder-suicide. From what I remember, he was someone that hung out with the same group of friends I did, but people in the group would pick on him. Seemed like a normal guy somewhat, other than a little socially awkward. He got into an argument with someone, and ended up cutting the guy's head off with a machete. Trent Benson was my camp counselor when I was a kid and went on to rape and murder a couple women in Arizona. I remember seeing his name on the news and was like, shit, I think I know him. I still had a friendship bracelet he made me at camp back in the day as one of my childhood mementos. No red flags that I could discern as a child. Reminds me of that case in the UK with that woman who was on the run from the law and kept on asking her driver to stop so that she could stab random people on the street. Like, both people she stabbed repeatedly ended up living. The douchey part is that one of the guys was walking his dog, and she stole the dog after she stabbed him. I think the dog was returned to him, but I'm not sure. My cousin went to school with a guy who stabbed his mother 66 times and then lived in the house for months with her decomposing body, then fled the province. He says that while he was kinda quiet, there were others that were even quieter and he never stuck out. He still has him added on PlayStation. He's been offline for a while, as the police did catch him. But I guess we'll know when he gets out. Looking back, he wasn't any worse than any of the other people I was around back then. Mostly quiet, sometimes moody but always respectful, and always at the bar with us but never completely trashed. If I'd have had to pick who I thought a murder would have ended up being, out of everyone I knew, he definitely wouldn't have been in my top 10 or 20. We even almost went out a couple times, but something always seemed to happen. I never would have guessed that years later he would have chopped up his girlfriend, who I shared a lot of the same physical traits with, and thrown her parts in a river. But it happened. Met him when we moved to a new town from the big city. I was 8, he was 11. While my older brother was talking to him next to the road, a car drives by and this kid throws a lit string of firecrackers onto the windshield. Later we found out he was actually aiming for the open window. They explode and the car nearly runs off the road. The kid laughs hysterically and then rides off on his bike, cutting between houses so he can't be followed. When the cops showed up later, they asked all of us about him and all we could do was describe him since we didn't know his name. They knew who he was and hauled him off to juvenile hall. He was a regular. A decade and a half later, he was sentenced to life without parole for first-degree murder for the death of his girlfriend's mother. Nothing comes to mind. He was in my high school drama class. Seemed kinda shy and that, but with a bit of a fuck around and find out. I always liked working with him on projects. Lived in a trailer with his dad and grandma and worked at Chuck E. Cheese. His dad was found shot dead with gang stuff painted on the walls, and the police bought it. He stopped coming to school the rest of that year, and before the next year one had moved away, so I never saw him again. About 10 years later he turned himself in, said Dad was abusing him and his grandma and he couldn't take it anymore. No red flags, male 18, one of 3 to earn internships to Boeing. No criminal history, would have trusted him with my kids. Very nice kid, lived with his mom. Argument with girlfriend. Ex, we think while drinking, hit her with a mug and killed her. Panicked and cut her up and placed her into 2 suitcases. One bag was found on a beach and they later found the other. 28 years plus 4 for the cutting. Stepbrother. The dude that tried to be my bully in junior high was an absolute psychopath. We got in a couple fist fights. He was terrifyingly fast and hit hard. Next year in 9th grade he raped and murdered one of our classmates. Sorry, my story doesn't actually fit the bill. Even at 13 I was like, that dude's gonna kill someone. A girl I went to high school with helped her new boyfriend kill his mom and stepdad. Then they stole her car and drove to Florida. A few months earlier she and a few kids decided to run away to Florida but got caught after a week or so. Seems her mom had passed from cancer a year prior and her personality did a 180. She's serving a life sentence now. It's not that I didn't notice them, but all the adults seemed to think it would go away if they ignored it. He was creepy AF. Carving Nazi and anarchy symbols into desks, walls, and once, the back of his hand. Talked a bunch about death and stuff. You could tell he really liked freaking people out. 15 years later, he kills a guy and all the parents are so shocked. His parents were so nice. Who could have seen it coming? There was a kid at my school that ended up being a stalker, knife murderer. Oh. There were plenty of red flags flying even when he was a child. A local Baptist church, whose minister eventually went on to be president of the Southern Baptist Convention, still let him be a kindergarten Sunday school teacher. That's where he found his victim, after stalking many women at the church. My cousin was the one who ran down 5 people in London, Ontario last week. I hadn't seen him in years. Moved out of his house when he was 15 and had been saying things about killing people since he was young. I didn't see that coming at all, but it wasn't until he ran those people down that I heard about his threats from earlier on life. She was nice, soft-spoken, and always has clothes that covered everything. Even in summer she'd have those kinds of clothes on. We lived in the South. The reason why she wore them was to cover up the bruises her abusive boyfriend gave her. One day she snapped. He wouldn't take her to work and started beating on her. She got a knife out the kitchen and stabbed him to death, rolled his body in a carpet and fled. No one knew until the landlord showed to collect rent. She was caught and spent a few years in gaol. Grew up across the tracks from a murderer. He was 2 years older and used to beat up on us younger kids. When we got into middle school he stopped but was still a dick. He left his wife for her friend. Then after that was over, he wanted her to take him back but she said number. He shot her in the face with a shotgun in front of her house while all the neighborhood kids were out playing in the yards. They found him next morning in his car. He put the shotgun under his chin. My classmate was the typical story of a good guy. He was going through a divorce, had a drinking problem, and decided to take one of his many guns and kill his daughters and himself rather than let his ex-wife get custody and make him pay child support. Those closest to him just took his anger at his ex as normal, not as an all-encompassing rage. Instead, they all drank with him, called her names and encouraged his hatred. I think we all assumed that he loved his daughters, rather than seeing them as pawns and property. A friend of my family was in the military, saw combat and was a highly decorated veteran. He always had a reputation for being very, very aggressive, which made him an excellent soldier but not so much as a human. If you pissed him off he would not hesitate to punch your teeth in, no matter how stupid the reason. Anyways, the guy killed one of his friends from the army over a discussion, went to prison and stayed there. To this day I'm not sure what it was about, but I heard rumors it was over a woman, so I definitely keep an extra eye out for people who display more aggressive tendencies. A friend of my cousin's killed her own mom. When she used to hang out with us, she was tipsy, kinda clumsy and not thinking with the full deck. But she wasn't violent or anything else. Never did drugs. But years later her and her mom get into a huge fight and she kills her mom, then left. Came back a week later with the police there. Neighbors reported an awful smell and called 911. When she got there, the police were there. She just straight out turned herself in. My cousin told her mom and me about it. Was kinda in shock because she didn't seem like that kind of person.